We have two CEOs of not-for-profits coming up now on The Leadership Voice. Welcome to The Leadership Voice. I'm your host, Jay Barbuto. Today's show features the leadership challenges faced by CEOs of not-for-profits. Joining us today will be Dan McQuaid, CEO of OneOC, and Maricela Rios, CEO of Human Options, two purpose-driven organizations that are making a difference in others' lives. We also have a special leadership lesson being delivered by CSUF faculty member Chethan Srikant. But let's start things off with today's quote of the day. Today's quote comes from Winston Churchill. "We make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give." Our first guest today on The Leadership Voice is Dan McQuaid. For the past 13 years, Dan has led OneOC, a 60-year-old nonprofit organization, in building and growing it into a one-stop shop with organizational development and professional management services that inspire, equip, and connect local nonprofits and companies to create greater social impact. Dan will retire as OneOC's president and CEO at the end of this year. He plans to continue to apply his 33 years of executive nonprofit leadership experience on a limited basis as a consultant with nonprofits and companies. The OneOC Register named McQuaid one of Orange County's top 15 people to watch in 2015, and the Orange County Business Journal listed him one of the inaugural OC 500 most influential in 2016. Dan earned a BA in psychology and sociology from the University of California, Riverside, and an MS in social work with distinction from Columbia University in New York. It is with great pleasure to welcome to The Leadership Voice, Dan McQuaid.
Delighted to be here.
Dan, I'm so glad to have you on here to share your story and wisdom with our audience. A lot of folks may not know about your journey. Could you tell us a little bit more about your background and how it progressed to eventually become the CEO at OneOC?
Well, you mentioned that I went to Columbia University to get my master's in social work. And after that, I was a psychotherapist for a number of years. In 1980, I took on the leadership of a mental health child welfare organization where I was the executive for 20 years. It was one where I worked hard to be able to develop a full-service organization that was mental health, child welfare, and education. I think that was where I began stitching different things together to have a greater impact. After that, I consulted for 5 years before coming to OneOC in 13 years ago. I think the experience was how to work with different sectors of the community in order to have a greater impact.
And what led you to that final movement to OneOC?
I think I always had a notion that nonprofits were like any organization. They needed the skills, the training, and the development to be able to achieve their results. And that's really what OneOC does. And I wanted to be able to move from being a therapist to actually having a wider community impact.
Maybe you could tell our viewers just a little bit more about OneOC, the organization, what that organization does. Some folks may not know exactly what OneOC is all about.
Well, and some people may remember OneOC as the volunteer center of Orange County, since it's a 60-year-old organization. And that was the name of the organization when I came 13 years ago. It was essentially a one-trick pony, if you will. It was focused on mobilizing volunteers in the community. And as it expanded and developed, we added training, consulting, and outsourcing services to help nonprofits be able to achieve their mission. And more recently, work with companies to have a greater social impact as well.
As a CEO at OneOC, I'm sure that you encounter many challenges. Could you talk about some of the typical or the biggest challenges that a CEO of an organization such as yours would face on a day-to-day basis?
I think there is a lot of misconceptions about what is a nonprofit organization. And that is not only for the people that work in nonprofits, but as well as the community at large. So first of all, the nonprofit is a tax status. It's not a business plan. And the other is that people don't own nonprofit organizations. It's incorporated in the state of California. It receives an exemption with the IRS to do charitable work, which is how we receive tax-deductible charitable contributions. But it is, in fact, a business. And it has employees, it has payroll, it has finances, there's a balance sheet, and it's like any organization. So I tend to think of nonprofits and for-profits as being organizations, and the line between nonprofits and for-profits, I don't like to make that distinction. It's not as if, I think there's more similarities than there are differences, and I think there's now more similarities than ever. So the opportunity now becomes, how do you work with companies that are for-profit, and how do you work in the nonprofit sector to partner to be able to achieve results, as opposed to one sits on one side of the dance room and one sits on the other side of the dance room and no one asks each other if they want to dance.
And so for you as CEO at OneOC,
right,
what are some of the biggest challenges that you have to face?
It's how to get the partnerships established. Nonprofits need to be ready to work with companies. And they need to be able to say, we just don't want to be an ATM or a drive-by. We really want a partnership. Well, that means they need to be prepared to do so. And they then can utilize the dollars, the volunteers, the skills, and the public voice of companies to achieve their mission. And likewise, companies really need to be prepared to work with nonprofits and recognize the differences as well, but also the potential to have a business impact as well as a social impact.
Oh, that's great. You know, a lot of folks may not realize the developmental journey that leaders take. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about how your leadership has evolved and how your leadership has changed during your career?
I think there's different styles of leadership, but there's also different career paths that people take. Some people want to be the expert. And I remember I went to Columbia because I wanted to be a psychotherapist. And it was the top-rated school, and I was going to come and be a psychotherapist. Well, that was one stage of development for me, and one stage of my life and professional life. Some other people, I think, want to climb the corporate ladder or the business ladder, and that people in nonprofits want that corner office as well. Many people do. But I think for me, that wasn't particularly a driving force, because I was 30 years old and heading up a nonprofit organization. I really am a spiral career person. I like to do different things. And so what motivates me is to be able to do things that I don't know, to learn, to grow, and change. And that's why my career, both at Canyon Acres and also at OneOC, these programs grew because I was adding mental health or adding education, or at OneOC, I was adding training, consulting, working with companies, just not with nonprofits. And that's what gives me gratification, but it's also how I apply my leadership style to my career pathway.
So you've always been kind of a change agent or a builder.
A builder.
At every step.
And if I'm not off-roading, I'm not happy as well. So I'm always looking at what are the differences, how do you connect things, how can things be more effective, not in one track, but how can you create a collective ecological approach to solving problems.
So are there things that you have learned in the more recent years in your career that you wish you had known when you were a 30-year-old heading up a not-for-profit?
I am amazed how much I didn't know when I was 30 years old, because one of the things I think was how to run a business, how to be able to manage employees and develop employees, how to be able to know what in the heck a balance sheet was, how to make sure that you had sufficient revenue to be able to operate. As we say around OneOC, no margin, no mission. And I think earlier in my career may have been that I could be Mother Teresa, and if you did good work, people should contribute to it, as opposed to looking at nonprofits have products and services, and therefore they have to also deliver the goods in order to be able to be funded, whether it be by grants or earned revenue. I think I grew up more on the business side earlier in my career, and that was the challenge, and that was getting training and learning to be able to do that.
No, that's great. And clearly you have, as you've really become the Midas touch of not-for-profits. You've been able to really make such positive gains really at every stop during your careers.
And I don't think that would have happened if we had been addicted to grants or charitable dollars, contributed dollars. I think the transformation, both when I was at Canyon Acres for 20 years or with OneOC, was changing the business model to 75% earned revenue. If we had been grant addicted, we would have died in both situations or not able to offer quality services. And that was what sustained OneOC during the recession and actually enabled us to build and grow. While other organizations were struggling to maintain, we grew. And it was because I think we had a business model that allowed us to look at earned revenue, not just charitable dollars.
Oh, that's great. Dan, I have another question for you, and this is, our viewers will be particularly interested in your answer to this. If you were talking to a young, aspiring professional that had their eyes on becoming an executive, a high-level executive, CEO, maybe even to start a not-for-profit, but somebody that has really high aspirations to become an executive, what advice would you give that person of things they should be focusing on, where they should be directing their efforts to eventually get to the role of CEO, but also to succeed?
Right. You know, I got my master's in social work because at that time, that was the ticket to be able to not only be a therapist, but also in the nonprofit sector, assume a leadership role. And far more men were doing the leadership role than women. And things have changed substantially, not just in terms of leadership and gender, but also because the heads of many nonprofit organizations aren't people that are the best therapists. They aren't the best in their field that their mission work is in, but they're business people. Right. So that is something that I would say is think about a nonprofit not just in terms of what their products and services are, their mission, but think about it in terms of these organizations that need communication folks. They need finance people. They need HR folks, that you can be part of a nonprofit. And you don't have to just think about it as in terms of the direct services that the nonprofit may offer, but what it takes to deliver that service and have a successful organization. So there is the opportunity now, because pay is better, to be able to have a life and live in Orange County and accomplish good works.
So you'd say that if that young aspiring professional has got to develop a strong business sense,
right? Because
ultimately, no matter how purposeful your mission may be, you've got to be able to manage the business and run the business.
And I may need to make a distinction. There's 5,764 nonprofits in Orange County. Half of those are under $50,000 a year. So I'm not necessarily talking about that because they're managing a small budget. It's with volunteers. There are about 450 that have more than $1 million in operating budget, and it goes all the way up to Goodwill with $120 million a year in annual budget. It's those that I think have the compensation level and have the need for a diversified staff, so you have a multidisciplinary team. And to get into those organizations, I think you need to prepare yourself. I do think it's important to think about what's your purpose. When I was young, someone said, so follow your bliss, following up on Joseph Campbell. I think now it's a little bit, what is the purpose that you can achieve, and wanting to have some sense of contributing to a larger good than yourself. And I think nonprofits can provide that to individuals. I think companies can do that as well. And therein, you can prepare yourself for a career that could be in a nonprofit or a for-profit. I think the best thing to do is prepare yourself to be a leader in an organization and to know how to do things in a a purposeful way that can get results.
No, that's great. Dan, I want to thank you for being on the show today. Our Leadership Voice viewers have been tuning in to hear your pearls of wisdom, so I really appreciate it. We're going to have you back in just a few minutes with the Q&A. We're going to take questions from our audience.
It was delighted.
Terrific. And now it's time for a featured segment of the Leadership Voice. It's today's Did You Know? Today's Did You Know comes from CIA.gov. In 2017, Americans gave $410 billion to charity. This is larger than most countries' entire annual budgets. Which ones? All of them, except for Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Spain, and the United Kingdom. This means that if all of the charitable giving in the U.S. were combined into one fund, those funds would be the 11th largest country in the entire world. It's now time for today's Leadership Countdown. Today's Leadership Countdown comes from Psychology Today. Did you know that only 25% of the U.S. population volunteers? With this in mind, and in connection with today's show, we bring you the top 5 reasons why you should volunteer. Number 1, volunteers live longer and are healthier. Reason number 2, volunteering establishes strong relationships. Number 3, volunteering is good for your career. The 4th reason why you should volunteer is that volunteering is good for society. And number 5, volunteering gives you a sense of purpose. Stick around, we have Maricela Rios in the studio, and we will be right back after this commercial break.
Well, we found here at Honda Center and the Anaheim Ducks that the Center for Leadership brings expertise in doing research, in doing training. The faculty that has come and given the training to our employees does all the research themselves. They're not pulling this information off the shelf. They're out there researching themselves, talking from firsthand experience, and it brings such a level of competency that we, again, don't find from other trainers that are on the market.
Well, simply put, is what really differentiates and distinguishes Fullerton and the Center for Leadership, really is your expertise. You guys are able to create customized content for our business based on true research.
The faculty from Cal State Fullerton, obviously they're professors of their field. They have deep knowledge and research, but also, aside from the theory, they really bring in some practical examples, and they bring in a lot of interactive activities.
The Bringing Learning to Work initiative is our way of meeting the needs of Orange County businesses and communities. When our clients ask the Center for Leadership to come to bring learning to work, the clients know that they're getting cutting-edge information, the latest thinking in the field, but they're also getting world-class training. Welcome back to the Leadership Voice. Our next guest today is Maricela Rios Faust. As Chief Executive Officer, Maricela provides vital leadership, support, and vision to the continued growth and success of Human Options. Since 2006, she has capitalized on her 20-year experience working with vulnerable populations and been a key provider in Human Options, becoming the most comprehensive domestic violence service providers in Orange County. Her commitment comes from a desire to raise her daughter in a world where domestic violence is not tolerated. Recognized as a leader in the field, Maricela is past president of the Board of Directors for the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence. She co-chairs the Orange County Domestic Violence Death Review Team and serves on the Orange County Women's Health Project Advisory Board. Maricela was named one of Orange County's most influential of 2014 for her leadership on increasing awareness of health impacts of domestic violence. So it is my pleasure that we please welcome Maricela Rios Faust.
Thank you for having me, Jay.
Thanks for being on the show. I'm so
be
glad to have you on the show today to share your wisdom with our audience. maybe we can start, if you could share a little bit about your background and how you've progressed in your career to take on the challenge of becoming the CEO at Human Options.
Sure. So I think as a young child, I always was drawn to human services. I think it came from my parents. Both of them are very human-oriented and always were helping. I actually did my undergrad, so I got a bachelor's degree in psychology here at Cal State Fullerton. And when I was here, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, but I was coming down the stairs one day and I noticed a sign, and there was a little note looking for a volunteer for a gang prevention program. And I thought, that's kind of cool. I think I could do that. So I did that for a number of years. Actually worked my way up from a gang prevention specialist or a volunteer, eventually got hired, then a gang prevention specialist. And then a couple of my mentors were noticing that there was an opportunity for me maybe to do more. And so I went and they thought, hey, why don't you apply for a master's program? So I went into a master's program, got a master's in social work at USC. And again, just kind of kept down that path until I came across other partnership opportunities, was at a community meeting, and somebody said, well, what are you doing at CSP, which is where I worked? And I shared a little bit, and they thought, hey, why don't you come over and work with us? And I got hired to do a national demonstration project with Head Start programs that was doing early childhood substance abuse prevention, which was kind of an interesting job. I did that for about 4 years, got to work with families and children, and for the very first time do some community work on a broader scale. So did that, and then got a call from somebody that said, hey, are you interested in coming to help us out at the Orange County Bar Foundation? So I did that for about a year, transitioned to them, went and did another national project on substance abuse prevention with at-risk kids. And then I got a call from the founding executive director at Human Options. And that is the call that really, I think, changed my career trajectory. It was one where I had an opportunity to get to know her a little bit better and talk to her about what I was seeing in the field. And a lot of what I was seeing really drew me to doing more family work. And so interviewed for a position with her as the director for the Center for Children and Families at Human Options, and then eventually got promoted into the COO job. And when she was retiring, threw my hat in the ring to become the CEO.
And how long have you been the CEO at Human Options now?
I've been the CEO for 2 years.
Okay, terrific.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of folks may not know about Human Options and what Human Options does for families. Could you share a little bit about Human Options so that our audience can better understand the organization that you lead?
Sure. So Human Options has been around for 37 years. We started as a nonprofit that was doing more safety net programs, and so primarily residential services, transitional housing, and we've evolved to meet the growing needs of the community. And with that has been really expanding our prevention efforts, so doing more with teens, working in the high schools, working in the community colleges, and then also expanding our community presence. So what we do is we break the cycle of domestic violence at multiple stages. So whether you need to flee from an abusive relationship and go into our housing, whether you need to be just educated about the issue and are in teen relationships and are still trying to navigate what it means to be in a relationship, what a healthy relationship looks like, and then also in the community. If you aren't quite sure and you're not, you know there's something wrong in the relationship, there's some, maybe he's talking to you poorly, maybe you're a child and you notice that the relationship at home between your mom and your dad is not good, we have community centers where you can walk in and get some counseling services to learn a little bit more.
Oh, that's great. So as you've evolved during your career, you've had a lot of different roles, and it seems like you've had a really nice trajectory of increased responsibility as you've progressed in different kinds of positions. Could you talk a little bit about how your leadership has also changed during those years?
Sure. It's interesting because I've always been very, I would call it nosy, although I guess a nicer way to put it is curious about different things. And so as I've entered into positions, I've always really dug in and gotten to know my one role. And so when I was early in my career, I was definitely learning my job and the job of the person maybe above me, and always really trying to work with others to kind of get a different perspective. As I've evolved as a leader, my view, I think, is primarily what's changed. And so my vantage point with which I approach, the lens with which I look at problems. And I think what that means for me is that sometimes when you are newer in your career, you're only really looking at what's in front of you. as you advance through the career, and particularly now as a CEO, I have to really look at the 360 view of everything. So I have to look at the donor landscape, the client landscape, the staff landscape, the political landscape, the business landscape. And so it's very much, there are multiple variables that impact our work. And so really having to look at it more holistically. Whereas earlier in my career as a leader, it was very much, it was a different vantage point. It was more, how does this impact me? How does this impact the person in front of me? How does this impact the staff? And so each time you have to add another layer of that. I think the other is listening, right? Is that as you go higher in the organization, as you become, it's much more critical that you listen actively and that you pay attention to what's happening around you, and that you have trusted professionals and in your surrounding.
And so listening would be one of the things that you've really started to punctuate more and more as you've continued to move forward in your career.
Yeah, definitely.
No, that's great, and that's great for our viewers to hear, because some of the great leaders in many organizations, when they describe the things that really stand out for them, they speak to listening. And so I think it's great that came out for you as one of the things that really took on a larger role as you've moved into these higher level opportunities. So if you could talk about the typical day of a CEO at Human Options.
Sure, I can try. There aren't very many typical days for CEOs, I would say. So a day in the life of a CEO would be, coming in, trying to get a sense of where we're at for maybe with donors. Maybe there's a meeting that I might have to go to, and it could be where I'm meeting with the donor to talk to them about something I think they would be really interested in investing in. And in that same vein, we could get somebody walking into our center that's in crisis. And so it could really be, I could have a plan for that day to look at the financials, to meet with the staff and talk about a particular initiative. But really, when you're in the nonprofit seat, and particularly a CEO, sometimes you also have to be able to respond to the person that walks in the door. I've had it happen where I've been on my way out the door and somebody is walking in crisis, and although I can get a staff member to help deal with that, we try as an organization at Human Options to be very responsive and not hand people off if we don't need to. And so really sitting with somebody and listening to the story. And I think my key role on a day-to-day basis is being able to tell that story effectively to make sure that when somebody seeks help, they felt heard. They felt listened to, and that we're able then to tell the story to not only our donors but the community about how important it is to be available and responsive to victims of domestic violence.
It's amazing how every day has a different feel, and every moment can bring about changes. But it seems that in the underlying role that you play, purpose seems to be central to everything that you're doing.
It absolutely is. It's, I think one of the nicest things about waking up in the morning is knowing that where I'm going, I have purpose, that everything that I do is going to have some impact on whether it be staff, on a donor, and particularly for those that we're in service of, that the decisions we make have a lasting impact.
Yeah, that's terrific. Yeah. So, my last question is, if you were to talk to a young, aspiring professional that wanted to eventually become a CEO of a not-for-profit, what advice would you give to that person, say early in their career, that might help them in their trajectory?
Yeah.
So that might help them to eventually get to where they might be able to lead a not-for-profit.
It's interesting because when I was newer in the field and I was taking in a bunch of information from a variety of mentors, and what I would say, one of the key things that I heard at that point was, do your job well and learn the job of the person above you. So that's one key takeaway, is that when you're doing your job, you have to really not only learn the impact you're having, but the impact of others around you. But I think even more than that, for me, it's really been knowing your purpose, know what sparks your passion, and then really go after an opportunity that sparks your passion.
That's great. I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. Maricela, we and the viewers are so pleased to had a chance to learn from you and to hear about both your journey and also your pearls of wisdom today.
you.
Now, you're going to come back here in just a few minutes so that we can do our Q&A. We have questions from our viewers that they would like to see us answer. So if you can come back, that would be great.
Absolutely, thank you.
Terrific. It's now time for the Leadership Voices Leadership Example. Today we recognize the 10 largest charity organizations in California based on total assets, according to NCCS. Hear that? You know what that means. It's time for today's leadership lesson. Today's leadership lesson is being delivered by Professor Chethan Srikant. So let's take 3 minutes to learn more about not-for-profits as social entities.
Hi, I'm Dr. Chethan Srikant, and here's today's leadership lesson. Getting non-profit organizations to make profit. That might sound controversial, but hear me out. NPOs need money to do all the good they do. Typically, they get this money as grants, which involve elaborate application processes and come with certain constraints, or it could be donations, small amounts, highly unpredictable. NPOs also have revenue sources. They still sell stuff, charge a fee for some services. It's not a big leap from revenue to profit. Manage your revenue stream like a corporation to generate profits, use profits to do some more societal good, but without having to rely on external help. You can take a step further. Become a social enterprise, a market-driven approach for solving societal problems, a for-profit enterprise with the sole purpose of using profits to do good. Why consider this? Well, in some instances, in certain states or in certain countries, NPOs face a lot more restrictions than for-profit organizations. It also opens up different avenues for raising capital. Most importantly, think of this as an opportunity to show the corporate world a better way of doing business. I'm Dr. Chethan Srikant. This has been today's leadership lesson.
Thank you, Professor Srikant, for that insightful leadership lesson. It's now time for the Leadership Voices Q&A. Viewers, do you need some leadership advice? Well, you've come to the right place. Every show, we take questions from you, our viewers, and answer them right here on the show. Today we have 4 questions, 2 for each of our guests. So let's get to question number 1. Our first question is for Dan McQuaid, and it comes from Fabian in Huntington Beach, California. Fabian asks, as a CEO, what would be the best tips you could share about time management?
So, regardless, I think Stephen Covey has it all down when he talks about making a determination of what is urgent and what is important. But if I had to look at where I as a CEO would want to sit, I'd want to sit with making sure I have time for what's not urgent, but what's important, because that's where your mind can go to strategy, it can go to development of things and products and services. I want to make sure I have time not to be dealing with an issue, not to be dealing with a crisis, not to be dealing with the have-tos, but dealing with what you want to do for your organization. And I think sometimes you need to get away in order to do that. So building in time away to think, to talk to others, to dream, and to consider where you want to leave the organization is really critical. And a lot of times get sucked into urgent and important, and that is important to do. But making sure you can think and plan and dream is also part of your job as an executive.
Great.
Yeah, I'd have to say, I think it's very much thinking about the top 3 things that you have to do as a CEO, and that's really driving your vision, making sure that you're we're focused on culture within the organization and that impact that you're having externally, and then relationships. The key to what we do is relationships. So as you make decisions about prioritizing time and what ends up on your calendar, really keeping those three things in mind.
Terrific. So our second question is for Maricela Rios Faust, and it comes from Jamie in Irvine, California. Jamie asks, since it is well known that salaries at nonprofits are generally lower than those in industry or for-profit, how do you manage the challenges of employee retention?
That's a great question, and I think it's something all nonprofit leaders deal with on a regular basis. Some of the things that we do is we do our best to pay competitive salaries, so we really look at the market on a regular basis to do that. Others is really incentivizing people differently, right? Whether it's work-life balance, which is important, but fundamentally one of the keys for us is making sure that we are sparking people's passion and really making sure that we're finding ways to engage that aspect of their lives and showing them how they're making an impact. And that we've seen really helps people feel like they're contributing not only to the individuals in front of them, but to the organization as a whole. And now really how they contribute to society is really meaningful as well.
That's great.
And I think that nonprofits have an obligation to be good stewards of the charitable dollars that they receive, but at the same time, I think they need to be competitive. Mm-hmm. A number of the time that people spend in one company or one organization is really shrinking. So your game plan has to be different. You're thinking about what used to be people could stay 20 years, 13 years at an organization if you're an old school person like me. But others are thinking about 3-year segments, maybe. And so now all of a sudden you're looking at how can you grow and develop and have that individual think about learning new skills, being able to have a sense of accomplishment, maybe even introducing more shared leadership within the organization. All those things contribute to fulfillment for the career path as well as the sense of purpose and being valued as an employee. I think that's no different than it is with a for-profit or a nonprofit. It's how do you professionally help your employees build and grow their career.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I along that line, I think that's part of it. As you're developing people, you have to think as a nonprofit leader that they may not be with your organization, but they're still advancing your mission because you've given them some skill sets and now they're at another organization and hopefully doing the good work and integrating some of what you've taught them in that work.
So even if they don't spend a lot of time with your organization, just infusing them with a purposeful approach to life and equipping them with better skills and better talent, you're still contributing to them and to their future organizations.
Mm-hmm. I think Nicole's item at Goodwill is a classic example, having been at Goodwill in a role as their Chief Development Officer, moving to Second Harvest, where she assumed a leadership role, recently came back to Goodwill and is now the CEO there. So I think what we're looking at is how do you develop people? Mm-hmm. And if you run a great organization, they'll want to potentially stay with you longer, but you're also developing people who later on may assume a higher or a different role within your organization. I think the challenge is a lot of times some nonprofits don't have the capacity because of their size to move up. And sometimes, like other organizations, companies, you have to leave in order to advance. Some nonprofits, you do need to leave in order to advance to the next level as well. Again, it's no different. But I think it's important to think about asking your employees, what do you want? What is your career going to look for? And then being invested in helping them achieve their goals.
Mm-hmm. Great. So our third question is for Dan McQuaid, and it comes from Catherine in Fullerton, California. She asks, what are your sources of funding, and how do these tie in with your long-term goals?
So OneOC has really been thinking about that recently, engaged in a year of planning, and part of one of the conclusions that came out of that is how can we become more long-term sustainable? And one of the things that was contributing to that discussion was the fact that we receive a segment that is government funds, and thinking that those funds are vulnerable, how could we transfer the revenue stream from government funding to earned revenue? So our mix is earned revenue that may come from fees for services or our work that we may do that's government contracted. It comes from charitable dollars that may be grants or individual donors, not too many individual donors. And I think the key is to blend your funding so you're not captive to one source of revenue or the other, but be able to have a strategy that creates long-term stability for the organization, and also so that you don't have to have a funding stream that if it gets cut, you have to eliminate needed services.
Yeah, I agree with diversification. I think that's key in terms of the nonprofit world, is really making sure that you don't have all pots of money vulnerable at the same time, because there's always some vulnerability. I think the other is really keeping an eye to the horizon and checking to see what are the trends, and where that matters is really listening to the people you're in service of, listening to your partners, and then paying attention to how those trends are playing out, because you can position your organization in a way that helps you meet the new need or the evolving need, so that you can continue to advance your mission and engage community stakeholders. So a big portion of our work is really helping people see that their investment in our work can help really change lives.
Oh, that's great. And so what are the actual fund sources that keep your lights on?
So for ours, we get government funding as well as philanthropic dollars. So we have 2 events a year that we put on, and then individual donors as well as foundations. And those are all individuals who care very much about the mission and have invested in human options to be able to end the cycle of domestic violence.
I think people at times don't realize that Kaiser, St. Joseph's, Chapman University are nonprofit organizations. It's $10 billion that's generated by the nonprofit sector. Just here in Orange County alone, 1 out of 10 people work for a nonprofit organization. So I think the notion of having that business savvy, that key leadership filled by people who can have the vision and can actually apply business practices is really critical. I don't think we have any Mother Teresas that are going to be canonized. I think we have people that are very passionate and purposeful, that are raising and building and growing great organizations and can partner with companies that invest their time, their dollars, their voice to make a difference in Orange County. So I think that's the changing landscape, is trying to figure out what's the mix, what's the blend, what's the future.
And I think it's also finding ways, so a lot of today's younger emerging leaders, right, is that they're trying to figure out ways to get involved, and that might not be a financial contribution now, or it might be a small financial contribution, but it's really connecting your friends to the cause that you like and then building on that. And that's something we've found, is that it's the next generation, the generation still early in their careers, many people that are still in graduate school or undergraduate school that are trying to find ways to contribute. And it's knowing that even $50, $20 a month, all of that helps us drive our missions and to create social change.
Oh, that's great. So our next question, our 4th question, is for Maricela Rios, Faust. It comes from Melissa in Los Alamitos, California. She asks, it is hard for victims to reach out for help for many reasons. Is there any specific method or message you use to encourage victims to reach out for help?
Yes, I would say it absolutely is one of the most difficult things for people to come forward and to share their story, particularly because once they do, they don't feel heard and they don't feel understood. And so our method at Human Options is to really work with the person who is a first responder. And that could be someone like you, Jay, it could be someone like Dan, it could be a human resource professional, anybody who comes in contact. And so the statistic is 1 in 3 people will know someone who is a victim of domestic violence. And that means that 1 in 3 people have heard the story. And when you hear the story, it's how you respond that really, really determines whether that person will continue to share their story and seek help. So what we do at Human Options is encourage people to listen, encourage them to not judge, and to know that it is a difficult situation to get out of. For those seeking help, do you mind if I share our hotline number?
Of course.
For those seeking help, you can contact our hotline number, which is 877-854-3594. And please share. We have been training physicians, we've been training law enforcement, healthcare practitioners. There is help available for people, and all it takes is one step. And it's a difficult situation to be in. And for those that are in a position to respond, again, there is help available to people reach out for on their behalf if they cannot do it on their own.
Terrific. And we'll make sure that number is shared.
And confirm it too.
I remember being a therapist and having a woman that I was working with that needed help. And the challenge is you could be in an abusive relationship, but you have nowhere to go, so you can feel really stuck. And you can feel that you can't find a safe place to make the transition. There isn't a next step to safety, to being able to be financially self-sufficient. And Human Option offers that. So when I wanted to make a referral, I called Human Options, and I wanted to know where they were located because I wanted to tell the woman who was in South County. I wanted to make the distinction, and they wouldn't tell me because I was a male. And I thought that was great because they were keeping the location confidential. And I only found out later that I drove by one of your programs on a regular basis and didn't know where it was. So the option is there is a place where people can go, they can get the help they need for not only themselves but also for their family to find that next step, to make that transition to being a healthy family, an individual. And Human Options just does a wonderful job.
And we've been really focused on having those options in your community so that, again, if leaving your home, leaving what you know, is a barrier to accessing help, is know that there is help in your community where you can come in for counseling services to heal and work through the trauma of your experience, and work with you on the right approach for you, so that we really want to create those safe places within the community where you could disclose and feel heard, and that people are standing with you on your journey.
Great. Well, I want to thank you both for being on the show and helping us sort through the questions from our viewers. I think we had some great questions. We had some terrific answers. So I want to thank you both for joining us today. Dan McQuaid, Maricela Rios Faust.
Thank you.
If you have a question or need advice, send us your question here to the Leadership Voice by email, leadershipvoice@fullerton.edu, or by Twitter, @CSUF_leadership. I think that's all the time we have for today's show. Today we learned about leadership in the not-for-profit industry, and especially some of the leadership challenges that CEOs face. Thank you to our guests, Dan McQuaid and Maricela Rios Faust, for joining us today, and a special thank you to Professor Chethan Srikant for delivering today's leadership lesson. Join us each episode of the Leadership Voice as we learn more about the leadership challenges across many different industries and contexts. I'm Jay Barbuto, and on behalf of the Center for Leadership right here on the campus of Cal State Fullerton, we'll see you next time right here on the Leadership Voice.